who is a yogi, and uh, your experiences being a yogi yourself, a monk, and then coming out and seeing from those types of challenges you dealt with, and then you now being in the world. How are you working? I mean, how were the challenges? Were they similar? I mean, I'm sure they're different challenges, but how was that for you, that transition? And if that's not too personal, you can go into it. Like, I just sort of, because there's this whole thing about in the Western world about yogi, right? We call each other yogi and yogini, right? As soon as we start joining the local yoga class, uh, we join the yoga class.
And then if you
That's
can
it.
stand on your head,
Yeah,
you're an advanced yogi.
you're an advanced yogi. So who is a yogi? Because I always wanted to know myself. Like, I'm
Right.
asking this, like, are you a yogi? Am I a yogi? And how do we really, without any judgment, but positive discrimination, how do you really know? How from an ex-monk perspective?
Right, right. Okay, there's a few questions in there, so I'll go
Sorry.
backwards just a little bit.
Yeah.
So the first thing you said is, what is a yogi? So a yogi is, the definition is one who practices, or one so one who practices yoga. Let's start there. Now, the next question that comes from that answer, what is yoga?
Yeah.
So yoga literally means to join or to yoke, right? Like to 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 extract the essence of, right? So the yoga of reading would be to understand a book, right? To understand the morals and ethics of a book, to extract what that teaching is, or what someone is trying to convey through written word. So this has to go back to Patanjali, right? Patanjali is a dude from way back when, in the day, right, in India, who was actually a part of the lineage that you and I, right, that you and I are a part of. And he was a Nada, a part of the Nada lineage or sect of Saiva Hindus, and so he worshipped Shiva. And way back then, he spent time reflecting and meditating and developing himself, and he wrote down what we now know as one of the most classical um, books or work on yoga itself. And his definition is really admired and should be admired because um, no other work has been able to supersede it, right? So he is the what the scholars would refer to. He is what academia would refer to, and he is the allowed to pontificate um, for yogis and sages and religious people and everyone. So knowing that about this person, right? His definition of yoga is the restraint of mental activity. Okay, so a yogi is one who practices yoga, which is the restraint of mental activity. Now, those answers bring up another question. What is mental activity?
Yeah. I was
Okay,
good. Just
so,
about to ask.
right? So that's why the more you know, the more you actually don't know. So if we're going to practice yoga and we're going to restrain mental activity, that means he set out 5 things that is mental activity. So sleep, fantasy, correct knowledge, incorrect knowledge, and memory. Okay, so let's take those 5 and now even take an even deeper aspect or profound insight that we get from his definition. In all of life, he's saying that there's 2 things. He's saying that there's yoga and there's mental activity. So there's either the restraint of mental activity, which is yoga, or mental activity. And he basically defined life in 5 ways, 5 different characteristics, all of life. Now, take yourself, take every thing that you have in your arsenal in your mind and think, have you ever not been sleeping, remembering the past, thinking you knew something, actually being wrong about something, or being in mental fantasy?
Yeah.
Right? That is life in 5 characteristics, which he deems mental activity. So the restraint of that, or almost like the defiance of life itself, is yoga. So anyone who participates in that practice is a yogi. Now, that's got nothing to do with physical asana or postures, and that's got nothing to do with the Western concept that we now know of as yoga, that we know of as you know, calming the mind through being in a heated room and wearing tight clothing and, you know, drinking a latte afterwards. So none of that is actually yoga, right? That is a manipulation or an adulteration of the practice that came much, much later. Now, I made that sound pejorative, or I gave that a negative context, okay, or a connotation. I don't mean it that way. So yoga, with physical asanas, the way the West sees yoga, is good, right? Because it helps people. Like, it helps people relax, calm down, and the restraint of mental activity, the way Patanjali saw it, is very challenging. And I don't blame people for wanting to work with their body first before they go to their mind. And I recommend it too, right? Like, I think people should be good at physical yoga or hatha yoga. I think people should definitely do that and be able to sit, because in the path of Ashtanga yoga or 8-limbed yoga, right? Raja yoga, the one of the first steps is asana, right? So it's restraints and observances, right? Yama, niyama, and then asana. So before we begin with the 5 meditative concepts, we have 3 that just deal with being a good person, not hurting other people, and then being able to sit down still without moving. So it's a part of it, but it's been taken to an extreme where all that yoga is, or all that yoga most people know of, is just, oh, like you do yoga, you go to a studio and you become more flexible. And we have to make the distinction early on that that's not all yoga is, and then that's not really where yoga came from. So now let's get into your other subjects. Those were over there. I'm pulling them back into the conversation, and I'm saying, so now you asked, as a former yogi in a system, in a cloistered monastery, how am I now outside in the world? So I am now a world yogi, I call it. So I was a yogi in an ecclesiastical religious body of people. Now I'm a world yogi. I'm still practicing the restraint of mental activity, right? So I still have that right to call myself a yogi, and now I teach it in a different way to a different body of people. The transition went very well, and it happened very quickly, and I'm enjoying every moment of it. And I find that because I was able to grow up inside of a monastery, basically become a man inside of an institution that trained men to be effective, powerful people, I'm able to take, the world and see it for what it is, see it through a mind that's been trained to deal with certain stresses that a lot of people get ripped apart by. And so I'm able to kind of work with people and try to help them see that and give them more of a monk mind through yoga.
Wow, that is incredible. That's